10, 9.
This is the biggest rocket motor I've ever built.
6, 5.
But I'm nervous because I know there's a problem inside.
1, fire.
I taught myself how to make solid rocket motors so that I can send a rocket to space, but in this moment, I'm pretty sure this one's gonna blow up. The nozzle might crack and the closure might fall out, but what really worries me is a mistake within the propellant inside. Super 8 is loaded with 120 pounds of solid rocket propellant that begins as a liquid. HTPB is the primary liquid with IDP used to plasticize the propellant. These two liquids form a binder that help hold the solid particles together. Lecithin and CaO5 are added as a surfactant and antioxidant, and these percentages are from a formula that I developed called Risky Batman. It's a middle-of-the-road propellant formula that balances viscosity with performance. Getting this balance right is crucial, and it's why I'm so worried about this motor. I made a critical error during the mix process, and these 3 sections of the propellant didn't fully cure. But to explain how this happened, you need to know more about the mix process. The next addition to this mix is oxamide, which is added to slow down the burn rate. A slow burn rate can actually be helpful for a space shot by making sure more of the impulse is spent while the rocket is outside the thick soup of the lower atmosphere. A hard and fast burn that spends the same amount of impulse will lose more of it to drag in the lower atmosphere. For my space shot design to work, each motor needs to deliver at least 100,000 newton-seconds of total impulse, and the Risky Batman formula that I refined and characterized should do the trick. With around 83% solids loading, it uses 12% aluminum powder as fuel and 69% ammonium perchlorate as oxidizer. Nice! This mix is a binder which is designed to hold these ammonium perchlorate particles together, but to further increase the bond between the HTPB and ammonium perchlorate, 0.4% HX878 is added. This is also called tepanol, and it's a bonding agent. There's a strange downside to the chemical reaction that happens here, but in the meantime, we'll add a few drops of PDMS to further aid the flowability of the prop, and with that, it's time to mix. These liquids are mixed together until they're homogeneous. Then the aluminum is added and the mixing continues. We call this the liquid premix. It could burn, but it's largely inert without the ammonium perchlorate oxidizer. The spiciest ingredient in here is the aluminum powder. It's really dangerous as a dust when it's floating in the air, but when it's submerged in the HTPB without the ammonium perchlorate oxidizer, it's a lot less dangerous. Less dangerous does not mean safe though, which is why for this whole process we're wearing full-face respirators and gloves. Each respirator uses dual P100 cartridges to filter out the very tiny particles in the air and is rated for organic vapors for any evaporated liquids that could be dangerous. To eliminate any pockets of air and coat each particle fully, the liquid premix is put under vacuum. At the same time, measured quantities of 90 micron and 400 micron ammonium perchlorate are prepared in bowls, and when the vacuum cycle for the liquids is complete, the AP is added. I begin with the 400 micron in small quantities at a time, mixing for several minutes in between, and after the 400, I add the 90. Dust control is the name of the game with the 90, so this is gently and slowly scooped into the bowl rather than poured. Just like with the aluminum, the AP dust is more dangerous when it's floating around in the air, so this dust must be minimized. With the addition of AP, I perform the same steps as the liquid premix to coat the particles fully in the binder. This mix lasts for a long time, followed by a long time under the hardest vacuum that I can pull. At this step, I hit pause, like literally. I stop what I'm doing, I shut down the process tracking software, and nothing else occurs that day. There are a couple of good reasons for this. Firstly, I'm tired. For a Q motor, we're not just making one batch of propellant, we're making 3. Each batch is cast as 43 pounds of propellant, and we assume 3 pounds is lost per bowl. It's about 130 pounds of propellant total, with 120 of that ending up in the motor. The other 10 pounds are lost to spatulas, mix paddles, bowls, paper towels, etc. I can't be making propellant in any state other than fully awake and present. If I've been mixing and measuring and sweating all day, that's not going to be the case. I'll be too tired to keep a clear head. Plus, in its pre-cured state, the propellant can sit like this for weeks without doing any harm, so there's no sense moving faster than we need to. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Secondly, the HX878 bonding agent releases ammonia gas as part of the chemical reaction that occurs between the HTPB and ammonium perchlorate. That reaction can take a while to complete, and during that time, little bits of ammonia are being released. And if you don't deal with this properly, that reaction's going to create thousands and thousands of little ammonia bubbles in the propellant with nowhere to go. Essentially, thousands and thousands of voids. propellant, and all those little voids are gonna do some really bad things to your burn profile. So the propellant is left in its uncured state to be cast the next day. It's gonna go into this tube, which is a 6061 8-inch outer diameter and 1/4-inch wall case. I cut down the case on the lathe since I purchased it in a slightly longer size than I needed. This is better than the horizontal bandsaw because it ensures the cut leaves the ends of the tubes perfectly flat and aligned with the center axis. The final length of the case as designed is 68.5 inches, and I'm so sorry I did not add an extra ½ inch. Please forgive me, I will try to do better next time. The bolt holes are piloted in the case using 3D printed drill guides. They bump up against the bottom of each side of the case to ensure they're drilled at the correct length, and the actual drilling takes place on the drill press. This helps ensure that each hole goes in straight. There's not much to cover with the case. I mean, how hard could it be? It's a tube with 49 holes in it. 48 of those are the radial bolts, and then there's one long hole down the center. Or is it a hole at either end? I don't remember where we landed on that. Where are my topology nerds at? They're in the comments frying you, dude. It's one hole. This is old news. Hey, you know what else has one hole? A nozzle. Anyway, we're gonna make a nozzle right after I tell you about the sponsor for today's video, Displate. Displate makes beautiful prints on sheets of metal that you can decorate your space with. And I've known about these folks for a while now, but only recently gave them a shot. Speaking from experience, the quality on these displates is fantastic. You can pick from over 2 million pieces of art on their website. The ones I liked best were the moon coming over the Earth's horizon, this James Webb Space Telescope tribute, and this photo from the moon. Anyone want to take a guess which mission this was? I'll give you 2 seconds. It's Apollo 15. You can tell it's a later mission because of the lunar rover wheel, which wasn't initially on the early missions. And you can tell it's 15 because of how tilted the lander is. Apollo 15 had the hardest touchdown of the whole program and ended up at a list of about 11 degrees or so. This right here is James Irwin, and the photo is taken by David Scott. Anyway, displates come with a magnet kit, which is a big deal if you don't want to scuff up your walls. There's no drilling holes, there's no trying to get things exactly level, you just use the magnet kit, and it means you can swap out different displates in the same location. They've also got a new line of prints called Textra with 3-dimensional features and different finishes to make sure that any image can pop. All of these get printed in the EU and they arrive fast, usually getting there within 4 or 5 business days. If you're looking to do a little decorating, these are a great option, and you can do that using the code BPS or clicking the link in the description. That's gonna get you 1 or 2 displates for 32% off, or more for 37% off until the end of September as part of Displate's annual Collectors Fest. This code will work for any style of displate except Lumino and limited editions. Thanks so much to Displate for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. The nozzle is sized in a program called Open Motor, and the critical dimension of the throat diameter is set to achieve the chamber pressure and thrust that we want from the motor. The throat itself is made from iso-molded graphite with a phenolic linen midsection and an aluminum carrier. All the parts are glued together with high-temperature RTV silicone, and the carrier has a radial bolt pattern drilled in the side in the same manner as the case. To protect the aluminum, a top phenolic section is also cut and glued to finish off the converging section. Each material within a nozzle has its own strengths and weaknesses, which is why I make it out of all these separate parts. For instance, graphite is really good at resisting high temperatures without erosion. But if you're wondering why I have a completed nozzle that isn't glued together even though the motor has already fired, I don't want to talk about it, man. So let's not talk about it. I already did that for like 26 minutes. Let's talk about the opposite end of the rocket motor, the forward closure. This is largely the same design that I've used in previous motors, so to recap, it's milled from 6061 aluminum bar stock, and I do this on the CNC to remove the bulk of the material automatically. Then I move it to the manual lathe to cut the final dimensions and the outer diameter grooves. The ignition bolt threads are tapped with an M30 tap, and the reason I do it this way is because I already had the tap and it was so expensive that I feel obligated to use it forever until it breaks. Anyway, I did this by engaging the tailstock and making sure the tap was centered, then slowly jogging the lathe on the slowest speed to use the torque from the motor to actually run that tap in. For the bolt itself, this is made from an M30 stainless steel bolt. I drill out the center for the ignition leads and then fill that space with RTV to seal it. The outside is sealed with 2 O-ring grooves. One of them's a primary, the other is a backup. After RTVing the ignition leads in place, an aluminum cage is placed on top, and this is going to get coated in pyrogen, which is going to ignite the motor. The closure gets the same treatment as the nozzle and and the case. I printed a massive drill guide to use as a way to pilot holes in the part, then finished off those holes on the drill press. Each of these gets tapped with a hand drill to accept the M8 radial bolts. To finish off the forward closure, I cut and attached a slab of linen phenolic insulation, then drilled and tapped a hole for a pressure transducer to measure chamber pressure during the burn. And with the case, nozzle, and closure done, it's time to head off to the bakery and cast some propellant. On day 2 of mixing and casting, we're starting off with 4 bowls. 3 are filled with uncured propellant, and 1 is filled with uncured liner. The liner is a formula that I call mystery goo, and it protects the inside of the case from melting during the burn. After adding in the curative and mixing for a bit, the goo is dispensed into the case on a spin caster machine, which should coat the inside with a thin layer of the liner. This process was, to put it lightly, a little bit harder than I thought, which is why I made this whole video about it. If you haven't seen it, I'm gonna spoil it, so plug your ears. I built this spin caster, mixed up a batch of mystery goo, prepped the case, and then coated the inside. The spin cast failed because the spin caster wasn't powerful enough, among other things. So I fixed the spin caster, got a new case, mixed up a new batch of liner, cast that liner into the case, and now, with a good spin cast, we're ready to do the propellant. To cast propellant into the right shape, the case is placed around a mandrel to form the core shape of the propellant, and it all rests on a 3D printed base. The mandrel, base, and casting cap are coated in mold release to prevent them from bonding with the propellant, and the whole setup rides on a scale to track how much propellant has been loaded. The core is a 6-sided finicille near the forward closure, and then a long length of center perforated propellant with this aluminum part of the mandrel. The forward finicille has worked great for me in the past. It provides an even thrust curve with pretty predictable performance, and by placing the finicille at the forward end of the motor, we minimize mass flux on the wall, which reduces the amount of burning and charring and stripping away that happens to the liner. We'll begin casting by mixing in the curative with the propellant. This liquid will immediately start turning the HTPB from a liquid rubber into a solid plastic. That means we're on the clock as soon as this first drop hits the mix. With the specific curative I'm using, I have about 30 minutes before it starts flowing a lot less freely. So while the curative's mixing in, here's how that works. HTPB, or hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene, is essentially lots of long chains of polybutadiene. And that's just like a synthetic rubber. But the HT in HTPB stands for hydroxyl terminated, which means that on the end of each one of these polybutadiene chains, there are OH groups. To use an analogy, these groups are sort of like magnets, but they're all polarized north, so they don't want to link up with each other. Anyway, one day this man walks in and he wants to make a rocket motor, so he pours MDI into the HTPB. MDI is methylene diphenyl diisocyanate, and we're going to ignore those first 2 words for the most part. You can think of these 2 as just being like a ring in our analogy. The rings in the chains don't do anything without that 3rd word. An isocyanate is a chemical group with 1 nitrogen, 1 carbon, and 1 oxygen in a straight line, NCO. The carbon in here is really hungry for electrons, and good news, the OH groups have lots of free electrons. In our analogy, that means the NCO group is like the south pole of a magnet, and since this is a diisocyanate, that means we have 2 of them. There are 2 south poles around this ring. When the MDI is poured into the mix, all these chains and rings start linking up via the magnets. The more these things link up, the harder the mix is going to get, which means that process slows down over time. And importantly, if your ratio changes or your mix is off, things will not cure properly. If we have too many rings or too many south pole magnets, this is going to weaken the mix because we have a lot of extra material floating around that isn't binding to something else. And if we don't have enough rings, it's going to have roughly the same effect. The propellant will be soft. So the propellant needs an even distribution of the right amount of MDI to cure properly. As I mix in the curative, the mixer is stopped every few minutes to allow me to scrape down the sides of the bowl. The mix paddle deliberately doesn't scrape the side or bottom of the bowl to reduce the risk of grinding or sparking in the propellant. This is a trade-off that means my mix isn't as thorough, but the whole process is a little safer. After enough mixing and scrape downs, I add a vacuum lid to remove any large air pockets, and the bowl is lifted on a crane to begin the pour. As we raised the bowl to begin casting, we realized we were right on the edge of how high the crane could go, so we had to keep pumping a little extra fluid in the hydraulic cylinder to keep it at that height. That's why the bowl is bumping around a little bit in this shot, and why it can't tilt all the way over. This is important. The bowl can barely tilt to 90 degrees at best. Maybe it's 80 here. The less the bowl tilts, the less gravity can do what it does and pull the propellant out of the bowl and into the motor. It's frustrating to watch this in hindsight because there are a lot of things that I could do to make the bowl tilt further. We could raise it up in the tilt mount that I built, we could remove the 3D printed funnel on the top of the motor, but in the moment, what I chose to do was gently pull the propellant out of the side of the bowl with a scraper scraper. I try not to touch the actual side of the bowl because the propellant will certainly be uncured there, but I was playing with fire. I mean that metaphorically, there's no fire anywhere near here. Scraping near the side of the bowl risks getting little bits of uncured propellant into the motor, but in the moment, it really seemed like the best option. Each bowl has 43 pounds of propellant. We assume 3 pounds are lost per bowl, and so the motor is cast in 3 batches of roughly 40 pounds. After each batch, the bowl is cleaned, set aside, and the next bowl gets cured and cast into the motor. I like doing it this way because these mixers work for all sizes of motors. These 30-quart mixers have made M motors, a batch of L motors, N motors, O motors, P motors, and now this Q. If I want to make a batch of small motors, 30 quarts is about the right size to do that, and if I want to make a few big motors, all I need to do is keep adding bowls. It's also good for redundancy, and it's why I do the same thing on the spin casting machine. 2 motors means that one of them can hypothetically fail, and hypothetically we could still spin cast a motor. 2 mixers means that one of these guys can fail and I can move over to the other one to complete the batch. When the cost per batch of propellant is over $2,000, it's way too expensive to let one dead mixer ruin it. It's a lot more work to mix in smaller batches with these mixers, but I view it as a good trade-off. With each pour, we hit the same problem, and we solved it the same way. At the very end of the pour, I'd use a plastic scraper to gently nudge the remaining propellant in, being as careful as I could to not directly scrape the sides of the bowl. At the end of the pour, I installed the casting cap. This piece squishes down on the top of the propellant to constrain the location of the top face, and the excess propellant is pushed out these 2 holes. The cap also had shallow indents to add my logo and the motor name into the propellant, and after 24 hours, I got to work removing the cap and mandrel. It was immediately clear that I had some uncured sections of the propellant, but waiting longer wouldn't have helped much, as the rest of the propellant was very solid.
There's a little bit of uncured prop in there.
What we're looking at here is a near lack of MDI in the mix for these spots. Pulling out the mandrel revealed the same at each boundary between casting sessions. At the top of each 40-pound casting segment, a little bit of uncured propellant dripped out. This is concerning because uncured propellant means unpredictable propellant. Any soft section will just get shot out of the motor at the start of the burn, and that section where the propellant was will become a void, which increases the surface area. We don't really know how much of this propellant is uncured. I can observe what has squeezed out of the motor so far, but maybe there are lots of big hidden voids that have lots of uncured propellant. There are really scary scenarios where we might have a large vein of uncured propellant in the motor, and if this splits off and liberates a chunk of propellant, that can clog the nozzle, which will turn your motor into a bomb. And I'm sorry for how often I use this clip, but it's a great example. If there's enough uncured propellant altogether, it'll just do this. Using an endoscope, I took a look inside the motor to see if I could learn more. From what I could tell, the soft segments were pretty sparse and only existed right at the boundaries between the casting sections. We can't know this for sure, but it's like a best guess. This turns what should have been a monolithic pour into more of a Bates crane setup. Since the soft propellant will be excavated and shot out the nozzle by the high chamber pressure, it'll basically have 3 segments of motor. And that actually makes this problem a lot easier to simulate. By using OpenMotor to model the 4 new exposed faces, that is the top and bottom of each soft propellant section, I found that the burn profile didn't change drastically, which means that this should be safe to fire, but there's one more thing I didn't tell you. The liner's thin. It's thin where it should be, but it's thin. See, you can get a higher propellant volume if you make the liner thin in the middle of the motor. You can fit more propellant in there because that section is usually protected from the burn by the propellant. The only time that the middle side of the motor should see any fire is right at the end of the burn, so it doesn't have to resist that for long. But that's not true if we have 2 big soft propellant sections within the motor that might evacuate and just start burning on the wall from the start. For a full 12-second burn, if we're assuming the worst case scenario, these parts of the wall will be burning the entire time. How much will that liner burn away? How much will it char? Will it really insulate the aluminum enough to not soften and melt and then burn through the case? There are a lot of unknowns here about how bad the situation is. At some point, there becomes a real common denominator between these worries. Enough things are unknown within a project, and they all have the same solution. You go into a thing like this knowing what you don't know. That's the thing that you're trying to test for. These are all comfy unknowns because the project is designed around them. Things like, can I build a motor big enough for my space shot design? Can I build a spin caster? Can I make a huge nozzle? Can I do a 3-batch casting session? Can I get a mandrel out of something this big? Can I even move it around? And can I get it into the test stand?
Slide it back, and you're not worried about getting it through that. Y'all feel good?
The less comfy problems are the ones you're stuck with as a surprise. Things like, can a new nozzle design work? Will accidental thin spots in the liner hold up? And is this enough soft propellant to kill the motor? The common denominator is that the only way to answer these unknowns is to get in the bunker, hit record on all the cameras, and start the count.
Okay.
Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stand has been armed.
Count is beginning. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
In this moment right here, I could have sworn that those 12 seconds lasted 20 minutes.
Damn! You are going to space, man!
This motor means I'm done with 2 years of work. Since early 2023, I've been building and firing rocket motors, all to lead up to this one, and there's no more motor development needed. It's done. Super 8 delivered a total impulse of 112,000 newton-seconds with a peak thrust of almost 15 kilonewtons and a chamber pressure of almost 1,000 psi. The motor performed close to the updated simulations that accounted for the soft sections in the propellant, and not only did the liner not burn through, but the case remained cool enough to touch it after the burn. But to answer all my unknowns, after the firing, I cross-sectioned the entire length of the case, and the detail here is incredible. This whole thing doesn't really fit on the green screen, but you can actually see the 2 segments where the motor burned through first. Right here and right here are basically the casting boundaries where that soft propellant was, and you can see the discoloration here because these sections burned to the wall first. And some of these areas have just shockingly thin liner. We're talking 1 or 2 millimeters. Like, had this thin spot been just a little bit lower or exposed to more soft propellant, I'm not sure the liner would have survived the burn. On the bright side, we still have lots of margin near the nozzle where the mass flux is high enough, so we could probably afford to go a little bit thinner on this section if we wanted. These sections should see the most erosion, and they don't look bad to me. That's great news. I also think parts of this nozzle could be reusable. Had I not run it through a bandsaw, the carrier and the graphite throat both look great to me. I can't spy any cracks or major erosion. The phenolic is trashed, but that's whatever. We're going to space, folks. We got flight software, avionics, and propulsion done now. The guidance and control stuff has worked great up to Mach 2.6. Telemetry was extremely strong on the last flight to 30,000 feet. Recovery is getting better with each flight. Camera quality is going up with each flight, and I'm really excited to show you what's about to come next. If you want to see the behind the scenes of this crowdfunded space program as it happens and before it comes out on this channel, you can get that for $5 a month on the BPS Patreon. That's how this project is supported, and I'm so grateful to the folks who choose to support over there. Thank you very much for watching. I've been having a ton of fun making these videos, and I've got some really exciting stuff coming this fall. My name is Joe Barnard. May your skies be blue and your winds be low. Agabye.